Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, and then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Chris Rexroad, and we're looking at a passage from Job chapter 25. So let me recap just a little bit. We're back in the book of Job this week. You would have been reading it all along, but the podcast haven't been necessarily covering it. And we're jumping in on this conversation between Job and his three friends. His three friends are trying to convince him that there has to be some kind of hidden sin in his life, which he needs to repent of. And Job is arguing, I don't have any hidden sin, and that his suffering is inexplicable. There is no way to explain why he is suffering. And so he continually is lamenting that he wishes he could get an audience with God so that he could make his case so God would tell him. You see, the advantage we have is we know why he's suffering. He does not. And so if you recall from chapter 11, we observed Job's three friends are arguing from a perspective that scholars call this retribution theology. It's the idea that God punishes bad people and rewards good people, or that God punishes and he rewards good deeds. So Job's friends misunderstand, and they misrepresent God, frankly. So anytime we study the chapters in this book that record their words, we have to keep in mind of their representations or misrepresentations of God. So in this case, Bildad's speech, this speech anyway, is not very long. And one of the interesting things you'll notice as you go through the book is that as they continue to talk, their speeches, so it goes in this circular motion, Job, then a friend, Job, then a friend, Job, then a friend. But as the book goes along, their speeches get shorter and shorter. And the question in the book of Job seems to be, why do the righteous suffer? That is the question that all religions wrestle with, okay? So it's not just to Christianity, but the book of Job in the Christian faith and in the Jewish faith, by the way, because this would be a part of the Hebrew Bible. Why do the righteous suffer? But there's this other parallel theme that is woven through the book of Job, and it is this: who is the true source of wisdom? So each of Job's friends, and for that matter, Job himself, set themselves up as the source of wisdom. They believe they are wise. And they criticize the attempted wisdom of one another. The climax of the book of Job is when God speaks for himself finally, and God will declare that he alone is the true source of wisdom. And so Bildad is speaking here, and in general, he believed God punishes the wicked and is merciful to the repentant. So we can go back to chapter 8 and chapter 18 and see that. He also believed that no man would call himself righteous before such a great God. Even Job seemed to agree with this point. In this particular speech, we see Bildad believes God is great and sovereign, and he is powerful and dreadful, and he enforces peace in the heavens. He also believes God sustains the entire universe. And so he says in verse 5, God is more glorious than the moon. He shines brighter than the stars. So on the basis of the greatness of God, Bildad concludes that man's only a maggot. And frankly, that's worse than being a sheep, a worm in comparison to God. And that just as man is small before God, so man's righteousness is small compared with God's. Since Job already agreed that he stated that he agreed with Bildad that no man could be declared innocent in God's sight. You go back to chapter 9, you can see that. There does seem to be a legitimate link between the greatness of God, so his power, his sovereignty, his greatness, and the holiness and purity of God. However, the struggle here is Bildad sees only a God who is a just judge without considering that God's love and mercy must be just as great as his justice and purity. It's an imbalance. It's not that God's not justice and pure. It's just that he also has mercy and grace as well. And so he sees God as this judge that gives exactly what man deserves. And Job struggles with this perspective as well. His struggle revolves around his belief that he's not committed a great sin against God and therefore is undeserving of the suffering he is experiencing. So Bildad's speech sets Job up for his final speech before his friends, and we'll look at chapter 28 a little bit later, but we'll see Job has this powerful moment of insight at that point. So, Chris, verses 1-6 say this. It says, "Then Bildad the Shuhite replied, God is powerful and dreadful. He enforces the peace in the heavens, who is able to count his heavenly army. Doesn't his light shine on all the earth? How can a mortal be innocent before God? Can anyone born of a woman be pure? God is more gracious than the moon, and he shines brighter than the stars. In comparison, people are maggots. We mortals are mere worms." When we think about how God is great and powerful and sovereign, how should that, or does that, lead us to also conclude that he's more holy and more pure than man? How do we come to that conclusion?
It's one to see that God is great, God is powerful and sovereign, because a lot of people will, even if they don't have that much faith yet, they can realize that there's got to be some sort of powerful being. What's hard at times is to attach this other side of him that is holy and loving and pure. But I think since our experience, what we read and what we've experienced in our life, is that this powerful being actually wants good for us, that he's not just like some dictator that we would see here on this earth, that he's actually somebody that wants good for you, that he wants your life to improve, not just to be more comfortable, but your relationship with him. And he wants it, like in a fatherly way, wants you to have a good life, especially with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say a lot of that points to that.
And when you think of God's greatness, how do you think of it in terms of fear or afraid or the fear of the Lord? When you think about how great God is, how does that change how you approach him?
Well, last fall, a lot of the church went through the book, The Awe of God, and it talks about that a lot. I think we have to have a very healthy respect of who he is, even though I don't know if any one of us can really grasp who he is and his power, but we know that he is incredibly powerful, but he loves us. So we have to approach him with a great deal of respect because of who he is and what he's capable of. But at the same time, we have to try to remember to look at him as a father that loves us, that will discipline us, will pour love into our lives and stuff with the hopes of us following him well.
Yeah, so why do you think we tend to lean more one way or the other? Either that's my experience in church, is God is holy and just, or God is full of grace and mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we tend to go one way or the other? Is it a human misunderstanding that you can't be all of those things? Why do you think people go to extremes?
I think some people go to extremes to kind of fit the take that they want on it. Some people are real rigid on the rules, and you got to do this and you got to do that, and then you got other people that are, I don't know exactly how to, they're full of grace and everything, that everything's forgiven, we're all good to go, that we don't have to like live by any kind of like rigid lifestyle or anything like that. And there's actually a balance right in the middle. But I think sometimes finding that spot in the middle is kind of hard to explain to people because of some of the stuff that we go through, like we see here with Job. I mean, looking at his friends, I can understand how they would have a hard time explaining or trying to give him good advice on this guy doesn't seem like he's really done anything wrong. There must be something hidden here, because why would God go and do any of these things to him? Which they didn't have the perspective that we do today.
I was listening to a sermon in the last couple of years, and he was talking about the struggle that we have to understand some of those concepts is because we only have part of those characteristics, meaning we may be just, we may be have grace, we may have mercy, we may have truth, but we're not full of any of those things. We only have a limited. I am merciful sometimes. I am just sometimes. I am full of love, or I show love. But he was talking about these characteristics that are listed of God. That God is, He's 100%. All of those things, which is hard for us to understand because we feel like we're made up in pieces. And so, the Bible says, depending on the translation you read, that Jesus or the Father, Jesus, either one, is full of grace and truth, right? And we don't understand how you could be full of two things, right? Because we compartmentalize everything. And we're more merciful to some people than we are to others. I see this mostly in children. I see like parents who are much more merciful to their own children than they are other people's children, or to other people. They're more merciful than to themselves than they are to other people. It's a really interesting thing. But the struggle with it is, one, we probably are more bent to one thing or the other. That's what I see. Some people are a lot more rigid, like some of it's personality driven. Some of it is, if you have a really rigid personality, where everything's black and white, like justice might be the most important thing, right? Even and then sometimes people are completely blinded. Like right now, I'm baffled about something that's happening in the world. Okay. There's a war been going on between Israel and Palestine, or Palestinians, really Hamas. And there are always egregious acts in war. There's no such thing as a clean war. And I completely understand if somebody is opposed to it, right? But in our country, we have people who have moved beyond peaceful opposition to blatantly breaking the law, breaking and entering, occupying buildings that, are private property. And their argument is, I'm protesting what we believe is a wrong on another part of the world by doing wrong in this part of the world. And I'm baffled when I hear people try to explain that. Like there's an old proverb, not a proverb from the Bible, an old proverb says 2 wrongs don't make a right. I mean, like I don't understand. It's like, okay, they hit me, so I hit them back. We tell our kids that from an early age. Don't if my wife hits me, the right response isn't to hit her back, right? That's not the right response. I don't. There's no modus. There's no motive that would say this is the right method. And so, I think we're just until we're not, right?
Yeah.
All of us are.
Yeah.
We're just until we're not. We're merciful till we're not. We're not always just. We're not always merciful. We're not always. But God is always. He's always merciful and just at the same time, and we don't understand how those two things go together.
No.
But part of our problem is we're looking at a small snippet of time, whereas He's looking at eternity. And when we get this rosy glass removed, we might be able to understand. Job and his 3 friends, I'm sure, understand better today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And we understand. We've got the full picture. That's the beauty of this passage, this book. But we have to be aware that only God has the full picture.
Yeah.
And our view is so limited.
Yeah. So. Gotta give it to Job for sticking out through that and just remaining as faithful as he did.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back tomorrow as we continue a conversation this week around the book of Job.